Hello, and welcome back to Storytime Banned Books Read with me. I'm Kathleen Francis, and after a long absence, I'm glad to be back. I was injured, and now, after much recovery, I'm feeling well, and I'm glad to be here at the end of a difficult year and ready to welcome a new one. So thank you all for still being here with me and for allowing me to read to you as I continue James Baldwin's If Beale Street Could Talk. That night, in the room on Bank Street, Fonny took the Mexican shawl off the pallet he had on the floor and draped it over my head and shoulders. He grinned and stepped back. "I be damned," he said. "There is a rose in Spanish Harlem." He grinned again. "Next week, I'm going to get you a rose for your hair." Then he stopped grinning, and a kind of stinging silence filled the room and filled my ears. It was like nothing was happening in the world but us. I was not afraid. It was deeper than fear. I could not take my eyes away from his. I could not move. If it was deeper than fear, it was not yet joy. It was wonder. He said, not moving, "We're grown up now, you know." I nodded. He said, "And you've always been mine, no?" I nodded again. "And you know," he said, still not moving, holding me with those eyes, "that I've always been yours, right?" I said, "I never thought about it that way." He said, "Think about it now, Tish." "I just know that I love you," I said, and I started to cry. The shawl seemed very heavy and hot, and I wanted to take it off, but I couldn't. Then he moved. His face changed. He came to me and took the shawl away and flung it into a corner. He took me in his arms, and he kissed my tears. And then he kissed me, and then we both knew something which we had not known before. "I love you too," he said, "but I try not to cry about it." He laughed, and he made me laugh, and then he kissed me again, harder, and he stopped laughing. "I want you to marry me," he said. I must have looked surprised, for he said, "That's right. I'm yours and you're mine, and that's it, baby. But I've got to try to explain something to you." He took me by the hand and led me to his work table. "This is where my life is," he said, "my real life." He picked up a small piece of wood. It was about the size of 2 fists. There was the hope of an eye gouged into it, the suggestion of a nose. The rest was simply a lump of somehow breathing wood. "This might turn out all right one day," he said, and laid it gently down, "but I think I might already have fucked it up." He picked up another piece, the size of a man's thigh. A woman's torso was trapped in it. "I don't know a thing about her yet," he said, and put it down, again, very gently. Though he held me by one shoulder and was very close to me, he was yet very far away. He looked at me with his little smile. "Now listen," he said, "I ain't the kind of joker going to give you a hard time running around after other chicks and shit like that. I smoke a little pot, but I ain't never popped no needles, and I'm really very square. But—" He stopped and looked at me, very quiet, very hard. There was a hardness in him I had hardly sensed before. Within this hardness moved his love, moved as a torrent or fire moves, above reason, beyond argument, not to be modified in any degree by anything life might do. I was his and he was mine. I suddenly realized that I would be very unlucky and perhaps a dead girl should I ever attempt to challenge this decree. "But," he continued, and he moved away from me. His heavy hands seemed to be attempting to shape the air. "I live with wood and stone. I got stone in the basement, and I'm working up here all the time, and I'm looking for a loft where I can really work. So all I'm trying to tell you, Tish, is I ain't offering you much. I ain't got no money, and I work at odd jobs just for bread, because I ain't about to go for none of their jive-ass okey-doke, and that means that you're going to have to work too. And when you come home, most likely I'll just grunt and keep on with my chisels and shit, and maybe sometimes you'll think I don't even know you're there. But don't ever think that, ever. You're with me all the time, all the time. Without you, I don't know if I could make it at all, baby. And when I put down the chisel, I'll always come to you. I'll always come to you. I need you. I love you. He smiled. Is that all right, Tish? Of course, it's all right with me, I said. I had more to say, but my throat wouldn't open. He took me by the hand then and led me to the pallet on the floor. He sat down beside me, and he pulled me down so that my face was just beneath his. My head was in his lap. I sensed a certain terror in him. He knew that I could feel his sex stiffening and beginning to rage against the cloth of his pants and against my jawbone. He wanted me to feel it, and yet he was afraid. He kissed my face all over and my neck, and he uncovered my breasts. And he put his teeth and tongue there, and his hands were all over my body. I knew what he was doing, and I didn't know. I was in his hands. He called me by the thunder at my ear. I was in his hands. I was being changed. All that I could do was cling to him. I did not realize until I realized it, that I was also kissing him, that everything was breaking and changing, and turning in me and moving toward him. If his arms had not held me, I would have fallen straight backward to my death. My life was holding me. My life was claiming me. I felt his breath, as for the first time, but it was as though his breath were rising up out of me. He opened my legs, or I opened them, and he kissed the inside of my thighs. He took off all my clothes. He covered my whole body with kisses, and then he covered me with a shawl, and then he went away. The shawl scratched. I was cold and hot. I heard him in the bathroom. I heard him pull the chain. When he came back, he was naked. He got under the shawl with me and stretched his long body on top of mine, and I felt his long, black, heavy sex throbbing against my navel. He took my face in his hands and held it, and he kissed me. Now don't be scared, he whispered. Don't be scared. Just remember that I belong to you. Just remember that I wouldn't hurt you for nothing in this world. You're just going to have to get used to me, and we got all the time in the world. It was getting to be between 2 and 3. He read my mind. Your mama and daddy know you're with me, he said, and they know I won't let nothing happen to you. Then he moved down, and his sex moved against my opening. Don't be scared, he said again. Hold on to me. I held on to him, in an agony. There was nothing else in the world to hold on to. I held him by his nappy hair. I could not tell if he moaned or if I moaned. It hurt. It hurt. It didn't hurt. It was a strange weight, a presence coming into me, into a me I had not known was there. I almost screamed. I started to cry. It hurt. It didn't hurt. Something began, unknown. His tongue, his teeth on my breasts hurt. I wanted to throw him off. I held him tighter, and still he moved and moved and moved. I had not known there was so much of him. I screamed and cried against his shoulder. He paused. He put both hands beneath my hips. He moved back, but not quite out. I hung nowhere for a moment. Then he pulled me against him and thrust in with all his might, and something broke in me. Something broke, and a scream rose up in me, but he covered my lips with his lips. He strangled my scream with his tongue. His breath was in my nostrils. I was breathing with his breath and moving with his body, and now I was open and helpless, and I felt him everywhere. A singing began in me, and his body became sacred, his buttocks as they quivered, and rose and fell, his thighs between my thighs, and the weight of his chest on mine, and that stiffness of his, which stiffened and grew and throbbed and brought me to another place. I wanted to laugh and cry. Then something absolutely new began. I laughed, and I cried, and I called his name. I held him closer and closer, and I strained to receive it all of him. He paused, and he kissed me and kissed me. His head moved all over my neck and my breasts. We could hardly breathe, and if we did not breathe again soon, I knew that we would die. Fani moved again, at first very slowly, and then faster and faster. I felt it coming, felt myself coming, going over the edge, everything in me flowing down to him, and I called his name over and over while he growled my name in his throat, thrusting now with no mercy, caught his breath sharply, let it out with a rush and a sob, and then pulled out of me, holding me tight, shooting a boiling liquid all over my belly and my chest and my chin. Then we lay still, glued together for a long time. "I'm sorry," he said, finally, shyly, into the long silence, "to have made such a mess, but I guess you don't want to have no baby right away, and I didn't have no protection on me." "I think I made a mess too," I said. "It was the first time. Isn't there supposed to be blood?" We were whispering. He laughed a little. "I had a hemorrhage. Shall we look?" "I like lying here like this with you." "I do too. Then, do you like me, Tish?" He sounded like a little boy. "I mean, when I make love to you, do you like it?" I said, "Oh, come on. You just want to hear me say it." "That's true. So? So what?" "So why don't you go ahead and say it?" And he kissed me. I said, "It was a little bit like being hit by a truck." And he laughed again. "But it was the most beautiful thing that ever happened to me." "For me too," he said. He said it in a very wondering way, almost as though he were speaking of something else, or someone else. No one ever loved me like that before. "Have you had a lot of girls?" "Not so many. And nobody for you to worry about." "Do I know any of them?" He laughed. "You want me to walk you down the street and point them out to you? Now, you know that wouldn't be nice. And now that I've got to know you just a little better, I don't believe it would be safe." He smuggled up to me, and he put his hand on my breast. "You got a wildcat in you, girl. Even if I had the time to go running about with other foxes, I sure wouldn't have the energy. I'm really going to have to start taking my vitamins." "Oh, shut up. You're disgusting." "Why am I disgusting? I'm only talking about my health. Don't you care nothing about my health? And they're chocolate-covered vitamins, I mean. You're crazy." "Well," he conceded cheerfully, "I'm crazy about you." "You want we should check the damage before this stuff hardens into cement?" He turned on the light, and we looked down at ourselves in our bed. Well, we were something of a sight. There was blood. Quite a lot of it, or it seemed like a lot to me, but it didn't frighten me at all. I felt proud and happy. On him and on the bed and on me. His sperm and my blood were slowly creeping down my body, and his sperm was on him and on me, and in the dim light and against our dark bodies. The effect was as of some strange anointing, or we might have just completed a tribal rite. And Fani's body was a total mystery to me. The body of one's lover always is, no matter how well one gets to know it. It is the changing envelope which contains the gravest mystery of one's life. I stared at his heavy chest, his flat belly, the belly button, the spinning black hair, the heavy limp sex. He had never been circumcised. I touched his slim body, and I kissed him on the chest. It tasted of salt and some pungent, unknown bitter spice. Clearly, as others might put it, it would become an acquired taste. One hand on my hand, one hand on my shoulder, he held me very close. Then he said, "We've got to go. I better get you home before dawn." It was 4:30. "I guess so," I said, and we got up and walked into the shower. I washed his body and he washed mine, and we laughed a lot, like children, and he warned me if I didn't take my hands off him, we might never get uptown, and then my daddy might jump salty, and after all, Fonny said, he had a lot to talk to my daddy about, and he had to talk to him right away. Fonny got me home at 7. He held me in his arms in the almost empty subway all the way uptown. It was Sunday morning. We walked our streets together, hand in hand. Not even the church people were up yet, and the people who were still up, the few people, didn't have eyes for us. Didn't have eyes for anybody or anything. We got to my stoop, and I thought Fonny would leave me there, and I turned to kiss him away, but he took me by the hand and said, "Come on," and we walked up the stairs. Fonny knocked on the door. Sis opened it, her hair tied up, wearing an old green bathrobe. She looked as evil as she could be. She looked from me to Fonny and back again. She didn't exactly want to, but she smiled. "You're just in time for coffee," she said, and moved back from the door to let us in. I started to say, but Fonny said, "Good morning, Miss Rivers," and something in his tone made Sis look at him sharply and come full awake. "I'm sorry we coming in so late. Can I speak to Mr. Rivers, please? It's important." He still held me by the hand. "It might be easier to see him," Sis said, "if you come inside, out of the hall." I started again, intending to make up God knows what excuse. "Want to get married," Fonny said. "Then you'd really better have some coffee," Sis said, and closed the door behind us. Sharon now came into the kitchen, and she was somewhat more together than Sis. That is, she was wearing slacks and a sweater, and she had knotted her hair in one braid and skewered it to the top of her skull. "Now, where have you two been?" she began. "Till this hour of the morning. Don't you know better than to be behaving like that? I declare. We was just about to start calling the police." But I could see, too, that she was relieved that Fonny was sitting in the kitchen beside me. That meant something very important, and she knew it. It would have been a very different scene, and she would have been in very different trouble if I had come upstairs alone. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Rivers," Fonny said. "It's all my fault. I hadn't seen Tish for a few weeks, and we had a lot to talk about. I had a lot to talk about. And," he gestured, "I kept her out." "Talking?" Sharon asked. He did not quite flinch. He did not drop his eyes. "We want to get married," he said. "That's how come I kept her out so late." They watched each other. "I love Tish," he said. "That's why I stayed away so long. He looked briefly at me, went to see other girls, and I did all kinds of things to get it out of my mind." He looked at me again. He looked down, but I could see I was just fooling myself. I didn't love nobody else but her. And then I got scared that maybe she'd go away or somebody else would come along and take her away. And so I came back. He tried to grin. "I came running back, and I don't want to have to go away again." Then, "She's always been my girl, you know that, and I'm not a bad boy, you know that, and you're the only family I've ever had." "That," Sharon grumbled, "is why I can't figure out why you keep calling me Mrs. Rivers all of a sudden." She looked at me. "Yeah, I hope you realize, miss, that you ain't but 18 years old." "That argument," says Sis, "is a subway token. Will get you from here to the corner. Is that far?" She poured the coffee. "Actually, it's the older sister who is expected to marry first, but we have never stood on ceremony in this house." "What do you think about all of this?" Sharon asked her. Me? I'm delighted to be rid of the little brat. I never could stand her. I could never see what all the rest of you saw in her, I swear. She sat down at the table and grinned. Take some sugar, Fonny. You're going to need it, believe me, if you intend to tie yourself up with my sweet, sweet little sister. Sharon went to the kitchen door and yelled, Joe, come on out here. Lightning's done struck the poorhouse. Come on now, I mean it. Fonny took my hand. Joseph came into the kitchen in slippers, old corduroy pants, and a t-shirt. I began to realize that no one in this house had really been to sleep. Joseph saw me first. He really did not see anyone else, and since he was both furious and relieved, his tone was very measured. I'd like you to tell me exactly what you mean, young lady, by walking in here this hour of the morning. If you want to leave home, then you leave home, you hear? But as long as you in my house, you got to respect it. You hear me? Then he saw Fonny, and Fonny let go my hand and stood up. He said, Mr. Rivers, please don't scold Tish. It's all my fault, sir. I kept her out. I had to talk to her. Please, Mr. Rivers, please. I asked her to marry me. That's what we were doing out so long. We want to get married. That's why I'm here. You're her father. You love her. And so, I know you have to know that I love her. I've loved her all my life. You know that. And if I didn't love her, I wouldn't be standing in this room now. Would I? I would have left her on the stoop and run away again. I know you might want to beat me up, but I love her. That's all I can tell you. Joseph looked at him. How old are you? I'm 21, sir. You think that's old enough to get married? I don't know, sir, but it's old enough to know who you love. You think so? Fonny straightened. I know so. How are you going to feed her? How did you? We, the women, were out of it now, and we knew it. Ernestine poured Joseph a cup of coffee and pushed it in his direction. You got a job? I load moving vans in the daytime, and I sculpt at night. I'm a sculptor. We know it won't be easy, but I'm a real artist, and I'm going to be a very good artist, maybe even a great one. And they stared at each other again. Joseph picked up his coffee without looking at it and sipped it without tasting it. Now, let me get this straight. You asked my little girl to marry you, and she said, yes, said Fonny. And you come here to tell me or to ask my permission? Both, sir, said Fonny. And you ain't got no kind of future, Fonny said. Both men again then measured each other. Joseph put his coffee down. Fonny had not touched his. What would you do in my place? Joseph asked. I could feel Fonny trembling. He could not help it. His hand touched my shoulder lightly, then moved away. I'd ask my daughter. If she tells you she don't love me, I'll go away. I won't never bother you no more. Joseph looked hard at Fonny, a long look in which one watched skepticism surrender to a certain resigned tenderness, a self-recognition. He looked as though he wanted to knock Fonny down. He looked as though he wanted to take him in his arms. Then Joseph looked at me. Do you love him? Do you want to marry him? Yes. I had not known my voice could sound so strange. Yes, yes. Then I said, I'm very much your daughter, you know, and very much my mother's daughter. So you ought to know that I mean no when I say no, and I mean yes when I say yes. And Fonny came here to ask for your permission, and I love him for that. I very much want your permission because I love you. But I am not going to marry you. I am going to marry Fonny. Joseph sat down. When? As soon as we get the bread together, Fonny said. Joseph said, you and me, son, we better go into the other room. And so they went away. We did not say anything. There was nothing for us to say. Only Mama said, after a moment, "You sure you love him, Tish? You sure?" "Mama," I said, "why you ask me that?" "Because she's been secretly hoping that you'd marry Governor Rockefeller," Ernestine said. For a moment, Mama looked at her hard. Then she laughed. Ernestine, without knowing it or meaning to, had come very close to the truth. Not the literal truth, but the truth. For the dream of safety dies hard. I said, "You know that dried-up cracker asshole is much too old for me." Sharon laughed again. "That is not," she said, "the way he sees himself. But I guess I just would not be able to swallow the way he would see you. So, we can close the subject. You're going to marry Fonny. All right, when I really think about it." And now she paused, and in a way she was no longer Sharon, my mother, but someone else. But that someone else was precisely my mother, Sharon. "I guess I'm real pleased." She leaned back, arms folded, looking away, thinking ahead. "Yeah, he's real. He's a man." "He's not a man yet," said Ernestine, "but he's going to become a man. That's why you sitting there fighting them tears, because that means that your youngest daughter is about to become a woman." "Oh, shut up," Sharon said. "Wish to God you'd get married to somebody, then I'd be able to bug you half to death instead of the other way around." "You'd miss me too," said Ernestine, very quietly, "but I don't think I'm ever going to marry. Some people do, you know, Mama, and other people don't." She stood up and kind of circled the room and sat down again. We could hear Fonny's voice and Joseph's voice in the other room, but we couldn't hear what they were saying. Also, we were trying very hard not to hear. Men are men, and sometimes they must be left alone, especially if you have the sense to realize that if they're locked up in a room together, where they may not especially want to be, they are locked in because of their responsibility for the women outside. "Well, I can understand that," said Sharon, very steadily, without moving. "The only trouble," Ernestine said, "is that sometimes you would like to belong to somebody." "But," I said, I had not known I was going to say it, "it's very frightening to belong to somebody." And perhaps until the moment I heard myself say this, I had not realized that this is true. "6 in one," said Ernestine, and smiled. "Half dozen in the other." Joseph and Fonny came back from the other room. "Both of you are crazy," Joseph said, "but there's nothing I can do about that." He watched Fonny. He smiled, a smile both sweet and reluctant. Then he looked at me. "But Fonny's right. Somebody was bound to come along some day and take you away. I just didn't think it would happen so soon. But, like Fonny says, and it's true, you've always been together, from childhood on, and you ain't children no more." He took Fonny by the hand and led Fonny to me, and he took me by the hand, and he pulled me to my feet. He put my hand in Fonny's hand. "Take care of each other," he said. "You're going to find out that it's more than a notion." Tears were standing in Fonny's eyes. He kissed my father. He let go my hand. He moved to the door. "I've got to get home," he said, "and tell my daddy." His face changed. He looked at me. He kissed me across the space dividing us. "He'll be mighty happy," he said. He opened the door. He said to Joseph, "We be back here around 6 this evening, okay?" "Okay," said Joseph, and now he was smiling all over his face. Fonny went out the door. 2 or 3 days later, Tuesday or Wednesday, we went downtown together again and started seriously looking around for our loft. And that was going to turn out to be a trip and a half. We'll stop there. The sun has risen. I decided to make this a middle of the night reading, and what a lovely time. I feel very blessed and grateful and very happy that you have decided to join me. Until next time, thanks again and take care.